I all of a sudden had this image of lightning coming straight through the ceiling, right down and zapping me. And I knew lightning spreads, and I was like, it'll hit everybody in this row and I'm going to kill everybody in the church. You cannot realize how real this was to me, even though rationally, I did not believe that was going to happen. What in the world? I literally ran out of the service. I got to the car. I'm having massive panic attack, trying to be like, Jessica, it's not real. Nothing's going to happen to you. It's okay. You can confess your sins now.
Welcome to the Full Mutuality Podcast. I'm Gail.
I'm Nate.
And today...
Sorry. No. I messed it up.
Oh, you're fine.
I love it.
I'm so used to being like, and I'm Jessica Goforth. No, that's so bad.
No, I'm leaving this as is. I want our audience to hear this. Totally as is. We've got our drinks in hand. We're having a great time. You're joining us after we've already had a little bit of introduction. But actually, Jessica, runs a podcast. She does one with her co-host. And you guys, Kathleen Reynolds, and you guys do one called Leaving the Village.
That's correct.
Yes. And you guys talk about ATI. Do you want to elaborate a bit on the podcast that you do?
I mean, you can just check it out. We're on all the platforms, Leaving the Village. And we talk about our experiences with leaving the IBLP ATI cult of Bill Gothard. So, yeah.
Okay. So
IBLP.
Yeah. IBLP and ATI. Those are acronyms.
Yes,
what
they are.
What does this mean? How big is this? What is this? Who started it? Tell us about it.
Okay, so IBLP stands for Institute in Basic Life Principles, and it was started by Bill Gothard in the 60s. We're talking a long time ago. His dad, his parents, were very involved in creating this ministry that originally was called Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. And he was at Wheaton College Bill Gothard was with, Elizabeth Elliot and, the other contemporaries of that era.
The heavy hitters in that era of evangelical conservative Christianity.
Yes, and Wheaton was like the center of all of that. And so he graduated. So while he's there, he starts this youth ministry, this youth outreach that he called, I think he called it like Campus Life or Campus Youth or something along that lines. Anyway, it evolved into what became the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. And from there, he created this seminar that you'd go to in the evenings, and churches would bus people to a large church or even an arena in town, like a basketball arena. And you would go every evening, and a Monday through Friday evening, and go through what Bill called the basic seminar. And he would teach his basic principles. And then on Saturday, you'd have a full day, and that would be the end of it. And you'd have this big book of notes, and he had a very straightforward style. If you Google Bill Gothard's basic seminar, you can watch him just standing with a blue screen behind him, and he's just flipping things on one of those charts that you projects onto the, screen. Mm-hmm. And, and you would write all these notes, and it was very... I think most churches considered it to just be real standard evangelicalism, like it was, pretty basic stuff, the basic seminar. But there was in there, a lot of more extreme patriarchy, extreme versions of headship and power differentials and this type of thing. But at the time, it went over pretty.
It's pretty standard.
It came across pretty standard, pretty conservative, but like nothing radically crazy. Most evangelical churches in the U.S. sent a van load of people to these seminars during the 70s and 80s, which is when my parents went. Okay. My parents went to a basic seminar in the 1970s. And then in about the mid-80s, the name changed from Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts to Institute in Basic Life Principles.
That's where IBLP comes from.
That's where IBLP comes from. And then during the early 80s, that is when Bill decided that homeschooling was where it's at. Now, this was, of course, the very beginning of the evangelical homeschool movement, which was this mass exodus out of public schools and into homeschooling for the purpose of, well, we know, avoiding racism, race, all of that.
Well, that's how my alma mater was started, where I went to, where I got my quote unquote university degree. They were founded as a response to, schools being forced to integrate.
Yeah. And so these white parents, evangelical parents, were taking their children out of school and going, I'm not sending my children to school with Black children. And Bill capitalized on this moment that was happening and decided to create the very first homeschool program for home education. And he called it the Advanced Training Institute. And that's where the ATI acronym comes in. And that's where the homeschooling aspect came into play.
So that's interesting. So ATI is not a church.
No.
But you have to, I guess, to become a member, you have to fill out a form and you have to follow certain rules.
You have to apply to get in. It's kind of like going to college as a family. It's like your whole family is applying to go to this special college.
Wow. So you're signing on board to be a part of this special group.
And when we got in, we were a third-year family, is what they called it back then. Now I think they've lost track of how many years there are, and so I don't know anyone who says I'm a 14th year family.
Wait, like third year, meaning the third year it was running ATI. You guys got in.
Oh, okay.
Right off near the beginning of the
really
movement.
Early.
So this was in the 80s, I'm guessing?
Yes, okay. This was in the 80s. I was 8 years old. And
how long did you stay for? From 8 till what age?
Till I graduated from high school and got married.
Wow.
So I was 19 when we got out.
It's like over 10 years.
Yes. And so they had ATI had several really big hallmark things that were their thing. One of them was reversals, because they were on the cutting edge of the quiverful movement.
I was going to ask how they were tied to the quiverful movement, because that seemed to be somehow linked.
Mary Pride was just writing her book. This was all just, I don't know if you know that one, The Way Home, I think is the name of her book.
Okay.
But
for those who don't know, the quiverful movement, and I'm going to give the most short version of it because I don't know a ton about it. But from what I understand, the basic summary of it is it's families that believe God wants you to just, birth control is not good. You must just produce as many kids, and the more the better, in order to help raise up a godly army for Jesus. So that's what I understand Quiverful is about.
Yes, it's a response to feminism as well.
Okay.
It is a massive response against feminism and saying that women were designed by God to give birth to children, to stay home with children, to raise children. And so their bodies should not be stopped from doing that. So they don't even, Quiverful is also very against natural family planning. So any sort of rhythm or timing things to be careful not to conceive at certain times. No, the idea is to actually just leave it alone and
let God decide.
Oh,
my little fingers here. Plan your family. And so it was a direct response to, the feminist movement, which was very, building up a lot of steam at that point in the 70s and 80s. And so my parents were caught up in this. And so the thing that ATI did that I've never heard of outside of ATI is encouraging parents to get reversal surgeries, which is to reverse a vasectomy or a tubal ligation. And so families within ATI would do this. There were tons of them. And my mother was one of them. She had a reversal. And I had 2 siblings after that. My mom had 2 more kids. And they were called reversal babies. So that was a big thing in ATI.
Wow.
You had a reversal baby.
I mean,
and if you had a reversal baby, you were cool. You were
you got special ATI points. You got to wear a special badge at conferences. I had reversal babies.
They'd line them all up. They'd have the mothers come up and line up in the front. And then as the years go by and the babies got bigger, they had reversal choirs where they would all stand up on stage and sing. All these little kids that were the reversal babies. Yeah.
Wow.
It was a big deal. And if you couldn't make it happen, but I don't know how much people realize that reversals are not guaranteed to work.
Right. I mean, I've heard in the cases of vasectomies, it's like 50-50. And the other, like women getting reversals is much more of a dangerous surgery from what I understand.
It's pretty involved. I remember it vividly. I was 10 when my mom had hers done. And, you know, and my brother was born when I was 11. And then my next sibling was born when I was 13. And so it was a big deal. So that's a big part of ATI. And then the other big piece was courtship and no college. So that was the other. So those are like the three main things. No college. So they had their own apprenticeship programs, they called them. So you would be educated after the wisdom booklets through their apprenticeship programs. I keep using air quotes here because
people can't see these. But wisdom books is something special to ATI. It's the curriculum you use at home. It's your devotionals. Or I don't know how many times a day you do them.
No, it was your curriculum. It was your homeschool curriculum to teach you.
Okay.
And then once they were old enough, you were supposed to send them off to the apprenticeship programs that they had, and they had many different ones.
Before we do that, the apprenticeship programs, I'm trying to think. You said no college, and when I was listening to your podcast, I heard you mention that in terms of materials you guys used, they tried to make you like basically turn off from everything except ATI. When it came to TV, media, everything you weren't supposed to have. But they were okay with Bob Jones University materials. Was that because that's the alma mater Nate comes from that he was mentioning? Yeah. So I was kind of wondering the tie-in between Bob Jones and ATI. Any idea on that? Or
I'm sure they were friends, the leaderships there. But see, Bill was very anti-college and Bob Jones was a university.
That's why I'm curious a bit about them using Bob Jones material because it's still a university. Even with
they would let us watch their movies, and my mom used Bob Jones like math programs and some of because ATI is not enough. I mean, if you go through those wisdom booklets, you're like,
I was listening to you guys covering that too on your podcast. I strongly recommend it if you weren't part of ATI. And even if you're not, they break it down for you. You guys do a great job of explaining. Yeah. Like you guys were covering, I think, a math section, and I was like, "What?" And you guys were like, "Yeah, this is it. This is how they taught math." And I was like, "How would anyone learn math this way?"
Yeah, it's not a math education. Right. It's just talking about how the Bible has something in it that you could break down with math. Yeah, you could count. Exactly. You could count.
There's a book in the Bible called Numbers.
And they count things.
That's
you learned.
Your math textbook, right?
But that wasn't even what it was. Like it was just like, I don't know, feeding the 5,000 and how God multiplies things. I mean, like,
oh my God.
Yeah. And they're not really teaching how to do the multiplication, just saying, see, multiplication happened. So multiplication is from the Bible.
Right. So they did kind of encourage you to have a math program. My mom would be like, this isn't going to work. We got to have something else. So sometimes she would use Bob Jones, their school curriculum, because Bob Jones' curriculum was designed for private Christian schools. Yes. So that's what ATI was kind of competing with Bob Jones by saying our program is just for homeschooling. You can't use it in a private school. This is for homeschooling families that are all in. Yeah. They're the real deal.
Wow. That's interesting because Nate went to a private Christian school that probably,
we used a lot of Bob Jones and Abeka.
Abeka.
Yep. Abeka.
Yep.
So that's Abeka. Interesting because then to think that you guys were competing against that. And yet Nate remembers there was a lot of ATI families that ended up at Bob Jones, which is...
That's an interesting thing, an interesting phenomenon that I'm curious about because, you said Gothard is famously anti-college and yet you have ATI kids showing up and applying for university at Bob Jones.
I actually got Bob Jones's their university catalog in the mail because I would somehow hit their mailing list when I was in my teens, and I remember poring over it and just thinking, "Oh my gosh, if only I was allowed to go to college!" Because it sounded like amazing to be able to leave home and like go to. And like study things like they had it. I was really into drama and music, and I was like, I could go to their drama. They have a drama program. Like, I was just like, I drooled and drooled over that magazine, that catalog magazine thing, that came in the mail. But some of the kids did beg, their parents, or their parents were like, fine, I guess if we're going to get secular and all that, you can go to Bob Jones or Pensacola Christian College.
Yeah. Oh man, that's even the more extreme one than Bob Jones from what I understand. The levels of fundamentalism.
So PCC likes to say that they are more fundamentalist than Bob Jones, which at this point they might be, because Bob Jones has evolved a little bit over the last several years. But the only thing I remember that's at the time that I was there, the only thing that separated the two was that PCC was KJV only, and Bob Jones allowed for other translations, but they did require that you use KJV for most of your...
Was ATI KJV only?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
it was. Although I remember as I was leaving that was becoming a big conversation. At first it was just kind of assumed because there wasn't a whole lot else. In the 80s there was just KJV.
Especially
and
if you were more conservative.
NIV.
Fundamentalists. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember my mom had an NIV Bible and thinking... Can I be in
trouble if people find out about the NIV?
Let's not let anybody know.
That's wild.
And she used it for her own personal Bible study.
Yeah.
But my parents, were not as radical at home as but ATI just kept radicalizing us more and more and more the longer we were in.
Yeah.
And especially with purity culture.
Yeah.
We're going to get to some of that.
Yes, because Quiverful needs purity culture and purity culture needs Quiverful. They go hand in hand.
Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
So, purity culture obviously starts young. You start indoctrinating a lot of very specific gender roles, and then, all of this, modesty culture and all of that comes in. And I don't know how much you guys have talked about purity culture on your...
We haven't actually discussed it as a topic. We definitely would love to get into it because it's an important one. We did when we were covering, I guess we started off talking about the rise and fall of Mars Hill Christianity Today podcast.
Yes.
And the second episode we did was specifically about the episode Christianity Today did on Mars Hill covering Joshua Harris, who wrote the book I Kissed Dating Goodbye, which was almost the purity culture manifesto of my generation, probably ours in the 80s, 90s was everyone was reading.
Yeah.
I came from an evangelical church in my childhood, and Nate came out of fundamentalism, but evangelicals were all on board with it just as much as fundamentalists were when it came to the purity culture stuff. I feel like that spanned both groups really, really strongly.
It was everywhere.
So we covered covered him, Joshua Harris, but not in depth, and definitely didn't get into purity culture.
No, we haven't.
So my parents knew the Harrises. I didn't meet Josh. He would have probably been, he's younger than me, so he would have been a kid that I might have met at a conference or something. But our parents were in the same world of...
Was he ATI, Joshua Harris?
No,
okay.
the Harrises were not. But they were, the conservative Christian homeschool movement was
tight.
all encompassing and very tight. And so ATI was smack dab in the middle. And everyone who was in the conservative Christian culture knew ATI people, and vice versa. You knew people outside of ATI, but who thought very much like you. And so it kind of all blended together. And Josh's book came out actually the year after I got married. So I had already done my courtship.
Oh.
And
so you knew about it before he taught people to do it.
Oh, long. ATI taught courtship from the get-go.
Mm.
And I remember hearing about it when I was 11 or about 10. And I remember my parents took me to my first basic seminar. I was so little, trying to take notes, and because it's not for kids. And but I sat there and was trying to be so studious. And I'll never forget the when they introduced courtship. And my dad, drives me home that evening. We're sitting in the car, and I remember pulling into the driveway at the house and sitting there, and him saying, "So what do you think about the courtship thing?" And I said, "Well, it sounds like a big commitment, because they ask you for a commitment to commit to courtship." And he said, "Yeah, it is. And I want you to think about it really hard before you decide to do it." And I said, "Okay, but do I really get to decide? Is it something I can really say no to?" And he just kind of sat there real quiet, not really. It was kind of the, we're just going to wait till you get on board. And I remember this moment of grief of realizing I don't get to pick my husband. And he's like, no, I'm not going to do it that way. But, your mom and I will be real involved in how and you won't be dating. And I just remember thinking I'm giving up something, a piece of myself that and it was a very hard decision, but I did it. And then once I did it, it suddenly became very romantic, and I bought all in because that's kind of my personality. I tend to like go cautiously up to something and like, sure. But if I'm going to buy in, I'm all in, and so I kind of bought in, and then it was like, it seemed like it was going to be the most romantic thing ever. And I was so excited and dreamed about it endlessly, and then ended up meeting the man who became my husband when I was about 16, and he was 21, 22, 23. He was older than me. So we did not start a courtship at that point, but knew of him for a long time. And then when our courtship began, it was straight up textbook ATI courtship. Like, we did it.
What does that look like for those who don't know what ATI textbook courtship looks like?
Yeah, so it was very, very similar to I Kissed Dating Goodbye, if you've read that. So, the father would notice maybe a young man paying a lot of attention to his daughter. The young man would be expected to go to the father and say, hi, I noticed your daughter. She seems pretty lovely. And I would like to talk to you about a relationship with her that would lead to marriage. And they would talk. So it would be, maybe they would talk a couple of times, or maybe they would talk for months and months and months. In my case, he was around a lot and he didn't say anything. And everyone could see the chemistry between us, but nothing was being said. So, like, he didn't tell me he liked me. I didn't tell him I liked him. Nothing was happening. And so finally, it became this big thing. All of our close friends were talking about it. Like, what are we going to do? I didn't know this, by the way. No clue anybody was talking about this. And so finally, one of our close friends confronted the man who became my husband and said, you need to talk to her dad right away because he's getting really upset because you haven't said anything. And he said, well, I really wanted to talk to my parents first, because that was another part of it, is that both parents really needed to be involved. And his parents lived 5 states away. So he wanted them to come visit and then talk all at the same time, like everybody be in the same room together. Well, then once my dad knew that, he calmed down and we waited for them to come for a visit. And they did. And again, I did not know this conversation had happened. No one told me. So they came to town, and there was a big conversation, again, without me there.
So you're just like, this is fun. My friend is coming to town and his parents are coming around and we're all chilling.
He lived in town. And I saw him every day. He was a friend of the family in my mind. And so I saw he was over at the house having dinner. He didn't have family in the area. So we knew each other quite well. But I hadn't met his parents or his family because they lived far away. So they came to visit him because he had moved to the area where I lived. And again, not to be with me, it just happened to work out that way. And so they came and our parents talked alone without either of us there. And they're like, I think our kids are into each other. I think we should start a courtship. Yes, that sounds great. This is official. Everybody shakes hands. I don't know.
Wow.
My parents literally met those people that same day. And since the chemistry between us was really evident to everyone, but when you're raised in purity culture, like, I didn't know what that was. Like, I didn't have any words. I could have told you I had a crush on him, but I couldn't have told you that he liked me back for sure. Like, we didn't talk about it. So I woke up the next morning to my dad going, come on, we want to talk to you. And they took me downstairs and they're like, okay, you're recording.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, I am? Like, I was in so much shock. You cannot know. I was like, so he does like me. And they're like, yeah. Like, they were, they were raised in different eras. So they're like, she doesn't know he likes her. Like, it's as obvious to everyone around us that he likes her, but I didn't know. He didn't say anything. Like, I didn't know for sure. So that day we have our first conversation about the fact that we like each other. And then it's like, so our parents said, okay, so you guys obviously already like each other, so you can get married whenever you're ready. And we were just like,
wow.
Married? I mean, it felt like an arranged marriage.
That is what the statement I wanted to interrupt you and say. And I'm like, no, Gil, stop interrupting. Listen, keep interrupting her. But like, that's what I was thinking. It sounded like an arranged marriage.
Yeah. And so that date was like early August. He put a ring on my finger as an engagement ring. At the end of August, our wedding date was November 8th. So it was like
engaged for 2 months. Wow.
That was, and we knew each other, but we hadn't had a relationship except for those 2 months, and we were never allowed to be alone. So we had a brother or sister in the back seat if we drove anywhere. I mean, you never.
And it's from that to, all right, you're married, get naked, have sex, make lots of babies. Yeah. Sex is great
Boom.
now.
Yeah. You want to talk about the weirdest period of my life? And I got pregnant within a month. So
wow. How old were you?
And I had 19.
Wow.
And he was 26 or just turning 26. Yeah. And so I had hyperemesis. So I started vomiting my brains out, and I got to be about 95 pounds.
Oh,
and so I went from thinking I was this pretty cute little young newlywed to emaciated and, and so sick. And had that baby, and then just barely 14 months later, had another baby. And then before the oldest was even 3, I had another baby. Before I was 28 years old, I'm still 27, I had my 5th child.
Wow.
They were just coming and coming and coming. Like and of course, being raised quiverful, you're like,
I'm doing the good stuff here. This is what I was taught to do, right?
Yeah. And I wasn't prepared for the fact that it wasn't what they told us.
Elaborate. What do you mean on that one?
It wasn't romantic. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't, I was in over my head. I was sick. My mom had glowed when she was pregnant. Like, she was gorgeous and happy, and like she had wanted to be pregnant, and she had help. She had kids that were older, and she had, she and my dad were financially situated well. We
not
were
19
poor.
years old.
Yeah. And I remember the day I was holding my 5th baby in bed, just, a couple of days after giving birth. And I suddenly realized that I was younger than my mom was when she had me, and I was her first child.
Wow.
And I had 5 children, because my mother was like the amazing housekeeper. She like had perfect house and like cooked meals and all the stuff. She was like Susie Homemaker, really, really amazing at it. And I was failing at all of it. And then I was like, but I'm 27 with 5 tiny little people.
I wonder what that does to anyone.
I wonder why I can't keep up.
Oh, man.
And, so anyway, yes, it was not what I was expecting. And I was very, and so I snuck birth control. I went to my doctor and I begged her to come up with something that was undetectable, that my ex would not know.
So that way you could
now my ex-husband, would not know that I was unable to conceive. So I got an IUD, and that worked really well. And it took him a couple of years to figure out why we didn't have any more babies.
Why the babies just stopped.
Couple years, huh?
Were you guys you had left ATI at that time?
We did. We left ATI right away.
Okay.
Immediately. Like, we met because of ATI. He was in ATI, but he was older, so he was never an ATI student. Like, he had gone through all of school in public school, and his family had gotten into ATI after he had left for the military. So he was involved in ATI as an adult, as a leader, and that's very different experience.
Okay.
But we had very similar evangelical backgrounds.
Okay.
And both of our parents had bought into the quiverful thing. So we talked about it a ton before we got married, that we were going to have at least 10 kids.
Okay.
Like, that was like going to be no trouble at all. I mean, I was 19. Why couldn't we pop out 10 kids easy?
So, like, a lot of those teachings just stuck to you. Like, even once you left that ATI, it was a lot of the indoctrination stayed.
We got in when I was 8. My parents went to their first basic seminar when I was 5. And so we had IBLP materials around our house for all of my memory. I don't have a period of time that I remember ATI not being a part of our life. So even when just the ability to tell my doctor, I want to decide for myself whether or not I have another baby, regardless of what my husband thinks about it, was huge. Like, you cannot know how hard it was. And that was years of being out. Years and years and years of technically being out of ATI. And I was wearing pants and, like all that stuff.
If anybody thought that was weird, women were only allowed to wear skirts in these circles.
Well,
so it's not like people were walking around pantless and then suddenly like, ooh, pants.
I wore pants.
I was Pooh Bear for a long time. I'm sorry, y'all.
Donald Duck just wandering around.
Exactly.
Okay, for those listening, we should probably maybe this is a question I had earlier on, but it ties into the how women, you were talking about women didn't wear pants where you were from. So you came out of fundamentalism, Nate. We're talking ATI, and ATI is separate than fundamentalism, or I was at least surprised as I was listening to your podcast to realize a lot of people who are part of ATI wouldn't necessarily all be at fundamentalist churches, that they'd also end up in evangelical churches as well. And maybe we can make that distinction between evangelical and fundamental. How do we sum that up in a quick
Nate
way
would
for
definitely
people?
be better at
What do you
that
think?
than me.
I mean, in terms of fundamentalism, I think I would probably come out of this with a bit more questions, because from what I understand of ATI, and some of the teachings that came out of there, it would be much more compatible with a fundamentalist church.
That's why I was so surprised to hear that they were at evangelical churches. Because, so there was one episode where you talked about the overarching theme of ATI being separating yourself from others, which is fundamentalism.
That's the foundational tenet of fundamentalist Christianity.
So evangelicals and fundamentalists, very similar in terms of beliefs on how Jesus dies for your sins, in terms of how you go to heaven, in terms of the Bible's role. They have like it's almost like, this is my perception. Fundamentalism is just much more like, we look like we're out of a different era type of group, where you're not allowed using rock music or drums or anything cool. You have to take everything very, very seriously. Your hairstyles, your clothing, everything is but much more old school. You got to look like you're stuck from another era in your church.
Right.
You don't watch anything modern. Everything's dangerous and bad. But apart from that, they share a lot in common with evangelicals.
Yes, because they do have the same, like you said, belief systems.
Basic theology.
Right, basic theology for sure. Their theology and their soteriology, which is the how you, quote unquote, get saved in Christian parlance.
Yes.
But I think the thing that makes the fundamentalist churches and fundamentalist organizations distinct from evangelicals is that, like, their obsession with the doctrine of biblical separation. They hold that so closely that they will. There's currently an argument and debate going on in and surrounding my alma mater because of their decision to start using or promoting Operation Christmas Child, which
their alignment with Franklin Graham is upsetting.
They now see that there are people who are connected to the university who see that as aligning with Franklin Graham's organization, which means they're taking a step outside of
the doctrines of separation.
Right. And there's a whole history as well.
I guess I didn't realize that Franklin Graham had a big difference in his doctrines of separation.
I feel like he's become much more, or maybe I didn't notice it before, or how different he is from Billy Graham in the sense that he, maybe it was the Trumpism stuff. I was like, wow, this guy is not just...
I grew up with him. I actually went to church with his kids. They were in my Sunday school class.
Franklin Graham's kids? Or wow, okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Boone, North Carolina, which is where Samaritan's Purse is. And so I grew up with them, and so they went to church with me. So I guess I assumed their theology was pretty similar. But again, like I'm saying, like my parents were, and I don't know if I actually did say this earlier, but my parents were more mainline evangelical than, especially starting out.
Okay.
We ended up in some fundamentalist churches, and then of course, and then kind of as follows, when my husband and I got married and we left, we ended up in fundamentalist churches. I remember going to several independent fundamentalist Baptist churches because that was familiar to us at first.
Kind of feels more like ATI, right? Ish?
Ish. Yeah. And, you'd walk in and be like, okay, yeah, I kind of get these people. But after a little bit, my rebellion would just kick in. Like, I wanted so badly to wear pants or skirts that were a little shorter, or spaghetti strapped top to church.
Oh, no.
And,
Scandals.
I loved pushing the boundaries. I remember one time I bleached my hair blonde, and that was a big deal.
Oh, see, my rebellion was I got frosted tips.
Oh,
Child of the early 2000s
Yes.
and late 90s with the
Yes.
frosted tips. You look like a boy band.
Definitely, there was definitely some of the influences of my youth. Who was it? I think it was Fred Durst.
Were you still in your fundamentalist church when you got your frosted
Yes, I
tips?
was. Because it technically, it was
Were you allowed?
It was against the rules at school, but it was not against the rules at church.
How did you start skipping school? What did you do?
I was done. I was done with school.
Okay.
This was. I stayed at my fundamentalist church for almost a year after I had graduated from Bob Jones. So I was no longer.
So this is what you did when you left Bob Jones. You frosted your tips.
Yeah.
there you go.
Yep.
That's awesome.
There you go.
Yep. And I stopped wearing a necktie to church. So I would just wear just wear the jacket and or a suit, but no necktie.
Okay, we're going all over the place.
Scandals.
But my experience in fundamentalism isn't actually my own. It's my foster parents. They came out of fundamentalism, but they would tell me stories of like when you're talking about the doctrine of separation, how much being pure and being better than the other people was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
They came out of like the same assemblies. They were like closed brethren churches were the names of these fundamentalists. But anyway, they and another, or maybe it was their church, split into over something so minor. And then they believe the same things. They're identical, but one is on one end of the block and the other is on the other end of the block. And they're not allowed talking to each other and they're out of communion with each other. And it's like, if you go to that church, you become unsaved because you're only, and it was just like like when they talk about those stories of the separatism, like that kind of we're so better than you attitude that was pervasive. It makes me, that's what I know of it or what I understand of it from the culture.
Well, and one of the things I think that was really obvious to me, because it took a little while after I left ATI for us to stumble into a Reformed church, because ATI is very not Reformed. No Calvinist theology anywhere to be found. And so that was interesting. But we did pull more Mennonite and that, quite a few of those. But they kept to themselves. ATI Bill himself preferred families that were a lot like mine, where they, and this sounds terrible, but the only way I know how to say it is just say it. We were pretty, attractive, well-spoken, wore normal clothes that fit his version of modesty, but looked sharp.
Right.
You looked like you had just come from a business meeting. But you were very conservatively dressed business meeting. That was Bill's ideal look. And a lot of people couldn't figure it out and couldn't quite strike it. But that was kind of my parents already. They did that look already. That was kind of the way that they were pretty sharp and dressers. And both of my parents were very well-spoken, well-educated, and leaders in the church and that type of thing. And so Bill loved families like us, and he would have a tendency to promote, and we didn't we didn't speak at events and things like that. But I think I was 11 at my first ATI seminar, where they had these huge ATI seminars.
Okay.
How big is ATI? How big are these seminars? How much people are involved in this cult?
Tens of thousands of people would pack into the stadium in Knoxville, Tennessee, at what was then the Thompson Bowling Arena. We've packed the entire thing. I don't remember how many people, but it was over 100,000 people. They're taking thousands and thousands and thousands of people.
Trying to look at the spread and out, how far out.
I should send you
ATI.
a picture.
Yeah.
Okay.
I should send you a picture, because that was the period where it was the top. Like when I was in those years,
or like the peak
that,
of ATI.
that 10-year era was the peak. It was definitely the largest. And those seminars were like these epic, events that we just looked forward to. And they'd have all of the apprenticeship students, they called us, in a big choir, and we all sang. And I think one of the apprenticeship choirs that you can go online, and I'll send you a link because you'll just get the biggest kick out of it, but it's on YouTube, of us all singing, and I'm in that choir, was almost 10,000.
We'll stick it in our show notes for those who want to see it.
Yeah, you can stick it in your show notes, because we were singing Bill's favorite song, which is "It Will Be Worth It All," which is a obscure hymn he adored. And we had a very specific style he liked it sung in, and we sang it every single one. But the first time I went, Bill was like a celebrity, so you would go and stand in line to speak to him if you wanted to have him autograph something.
Oh, wow.
And I got in line and I waited to speak to him. My dad was just kind of like, what? And we were with another family, and they had a son that was just a couple months older than me. And my dad made him go with me, and because he didn't want me running around the Thompson Bowling Arena by myself. I was 11. And so I go down there, and my friend's with me. He's like shifting. He was really annoyed. He's like, I don't want to do this. He was not the groupie type. And I was like, I'm going to meet Mr. Gothard. And so I get up
sound
there.
like a cult at all.
No, right? Oh my gosh. So we get up there, and he says, hi. And I said, hi, I'm Jessica Goforth. And he says, well, it's nice to meet you. You know, he could tell that I had the little stars in my eyes, and he kind of gets down a little bit on my level, and he says, is this your brother with you? And he was like, no, I'm not her brother. And I was like, no, he's my friend. And he was like, oh, like that was naughty.
Oh,
and I was like,
man.
And so then he says, well, he signs my Bible for me. And then he said, he looks at me, and he does that little look, you know, that creepy men do. And he's like, come see me in a few years.
Oh, boy.
You keep coming back to see me. And I did. Every single seminar where he was, I would go up and I would wait in line, and I would see, and he knew exactly who I was every single time. And he'd be like, you're Jessica, right? And I'd be like, yes. Oh my gosh.
I mean,
remember, you know.
And having listened to and knowing the history of some of the scandals that have broken with regards to Bill Gothard and how he handled women, and all of the stories that have been put together over what he was doing behind the scenes and how creepy. A lot of women were handpicked to be his personal, I don't know what, go hang with him, tour with him.
Yep.
Sounds like a harem.
It really does.
Yes.
And
yeah, it really was.
As I was listening to your story, you mentioned at some point that he asked your dad if you could join him as part of that as well.
Yeah, he did. And, you know, this was after years of this. And in some ways it was a type of grooming, you know, because you get more and more and more familiar with him. And yeah, he did. He asked my dad if I would join his traveling staff and be part of his little entourage. And, you know, my dad was a business owner. And so he was like, so you interviewed her for a job? And Mr. Gothard was like, no, I just noticed that she has a very shining countenance. These are ATI terms, you know. And my dad was like, but what do you want her to do? Ooh. And he said, well, I want her to meet, dignitaries and famous people all over the world, and, you know, presidents of countries. And my dad's like, yeah, but like, what's she going to do?
Sounds like your dad was sharp.
Yeah, it was like all of a sudden he was realizing this was not a job interview. This was just she seems really sharp. And he knew that I could present, you know, very articulate and
But your dad was like,
open.
Spell this out. What is she there for?
But he also knew I didn't really have an education. And so he was like, I need to know what you plan on having her do, you know, and I think that he may have sensed, I don't know. When I asked him later, years and years later, he's like, I didn't know he was a creep. I have no idea. Like, but it just didn't sound right. And he said, I was paying a lot for you to be in that program you were in right now. And he said, I didn't want to just yank you out on the whim of some guy who didn't even really know what he was going to have you do. He said, yeah, no. Yeah. And so he just said, no. I'm just grateful.
Breathed such a sigh of relief when you said that, when you told your story. And I was like, thank goodness she was spared. And from what I understand of the other women that put a lawsuit together against him, the only reason it didn't go to court was because the statute of limitations expired, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
That just makes me so angry, because I feel like that's such a common thing in a lot of religious sex abuse situations.
So I have a question, because I had read that IBLP had made some half-hearted attempts at distancing themselves from Gothard in the wake of some of these scandals, and yet he's still sort of explain some of that to me, because I'm a little confused as to how all of that is playing out.
How is that played out?
Well, because is no ATI or IBLP without Bill Gothard's materials. Everything is presented by him. Every video is presented by him. Every thing is written as if it's his, although there were whole teams of people that wrote those materials. The wisdom booklets were not something he sat in his office and wrote. There were teams of people, and some of them were just students, kids that liked to research, and they'd get stuck in a room to help create the wisdom booklets. So it's a very strange education. Anyone who's looked at it, who knows anything about educating children, is like, this is at best a Bible study. At worst, it is some sort of convoluted attempt to brainwash people.
And what blows my mind is there's all of this obsession about how families are supposed to be structured, right? Like he wrote so much about how families are supposed to be structured, and he didn't have a family of his own.
Never married.
Never married.
Never
had any children of his own. So
that
ATI
sounds like a
now
good person to have you instructing you on all of that.
Right. And so, yeah, he resigned in light of a lot of the scandal, and I think he expected the scandal to blow over and come back. And the board just said no. So that was very shocking to him. But ATI doesn't work or doesn't exist without Bill Gothard's materials, his name, his face, his videos. And so everyone still thinks of him as the figurehead, I would say, of ATI. But technically, he's not allowed on campus. There's a great, wonderful, very cathartic video to watch of him trying to get onto this big sandy campus and the police escorting him off.
Wow. That's incredible.
It's on YouTube, and I tell you, that video, it's about an hour long. It takes forever for them to get him off, to get him out of there. But I
must be
watched
satisfying
it
for ex-members to watch.
It was.
Well, I mean,
they said, you can't be here. You can't be here.
So how, I guess I'm confused though, because nobody questioned the fact that he was the one writing these materials. Nobody tried to put things together. What was the rationale? So hypothetically, if somebody were to have asked, how come this single guy who doesn't have kids of his own gets to dictate how we all run our families?
What was the standard ATI answer to this?
What would they have? What was the rationale?
He was a great speaker, had great ideas. He was presenting things that were already out there by others like Gary Smalley and, Jim Dobson. And these guys were already talking about a lot of these concepts, and they were married and did have families. And so he was considered to be someone who was presenting things that were already well believed already by people who were fathers, mothers, parents, and so it wasn't necessarily considered to be his original ideas, everything, but that he had packaged it for you.
He was like the genius that took all the great ideas out there and helped you to get the fullness of all of the different stuff in
so
the
it
right
didn't
way.
occur. Nobody felt like he had brand spanking new ideas.
Okay.
No one felt like his ideas were all new, or anything that he was teaching was new. It was just that he
had a special anointing or something. My God.
Well, no, that he put it together in a way that was useful, and his big thing at the basic seminar is his 7 basic principles for life, which he said were non-optional. And so if you followed them, whether you were a Christian or not, you did not need to be saved. You did not need to be a Christian for these principles to benefit your life. So in that way, he was like what did they call it?
Like a guru?
Yeah, like a prosperity gospel preacher is what I was going for.
Right. God will bless your life. If you follow this formula, the good blessings will flow on to you guys. And if you leave this stuff, it's going to go bad.
Right. Exactly. And it was terrifying, the stories he would tell. They had lots of materials that were of snakes biting people and killing their entire family, because they didn't follow God's law, direction for their life, car accidents and causing people to die. I mean, I was very afraid. I spent most of I was afraid of not confessing my sins before communion. So because ATI was also a lot of Baptist kind of theology, and I had attended Baptist churches, so they only do it every 5th Sunday.
Oh, okay.
You have communion every time there's a 5th Sunday in a month.
Oh, really? That
is the way they do it.
Huh? Yeah, my church did it once a month.
Well, mine was Open Brethren. We were the realist Christians. We did it every single week. We had Breaking Your Bread.
Every single. See, that's where my problem came in, because I was used to it only being on a month that had a 5th Sunday. So that's not very often. It's like 3 times a year, maybe. It's not very often. So it's a big deal. Everything would change. The whole entire service would be structured differently. And there was a lot of time to pray and confess your sins before taking communion. Well, I had been out a long time. We had been in normal churches for years, and I visited my parents who were going to Max Lucado's church in San Antonio.
Oh, okay.
And I've got my whole herd of little kids, and we're like in there, and the service has started, the music is going, and little cups are being passed around of grape juice, and then, little tiny wafers, and you just grabbed, they were like sitting together, the wafer was underneath the little cup of juice, and
did you peel it? Is it one of those that you peel?
They wasn't quite that fancy yet. Okay. They were just kind of sitting together.
Oh, okay.
And so I'm corralling my kids, and I'm doing all this stuff, and it comes to me, and I take it, and I'm trying to keep my tiny little kids from being like, "Oh, juice," and so I open it, I take it, and I took it, and then I look around, and I sit down, and like a wall of guilt hits me. I didn't even stop to pray. I didn't even think about confessing anything. And I all of a sudden had this image of lightning coming straight through the ceiling, right down and zapping me. And I knew lightning spreads, and I was like, it'll hit everybody in this row, and I'm going to kill everybody in the church.
All your children with you.
You cannot realize how real this was to me.
Wow.
Even though rationally, I did not believe that was going to happen.
That's how much fear was a part of how they raised you, to be afraid if you didn't do things the certain way, God was going to punish you.
Yeah.
I literally ran out of the service. I grabbed my purse and my keys, and I ran out, and I got to the car. I'm having massive panic attack, trying to be like, Jessica, it's not real. Nothing's going to happen to you. It's okay. You can confess your sins now. Go ahead. Just get started. Get going, and I'm like in the parking lot gulping air. My husband at the time chases me out, and he's like, what is happening? What is going on? What's wrong with you? And I'm like sobbing. Tears are just pouring out of my eyes. And he's like, what happened? I don't understand what happened. And I was like choking at it. I took communion without praying. He's like, I'm sure you're okay. I was like, nope, not okay.
Wow.
Not okay. It was so bad. And these kinds of things would just happen. I mean, again,
it's triggers.
10 years out of ATI.
I mean, we had a guest recently who came out of Hillsong, and she mentioned how when she visited another church, it was fog machines.
Yeah.
So, as soon as the fog appeared, she mentally just
and 5 years had gone by for her.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. 10 years can go by, and something can just bring you pull you right back into the worst of it, and the reactions are just so visceral. Yeah. It's like your whole body just shuts down or freaks out.
So let's backtrack a little bit. When you and your ex left ATI, was that a big process? I mean, you said you left pretty much right after. Okay, so it wasn't like you felt this. There wasn't like a big escape story for you.
For us, it was more like we were done.
Okay.
And what's hard, the courtship process was so strange in the sense that we followed all the rules, we did all the things, and we were married, and then it almost felt irrelevant.
Okay.
Like, he had an education, I was now going to have all the babies. Like, we didn't want to use this material anymore. Both of us were kind of burned by it. We felt really used and abused. And if you listen to my podcast, you'll find out a lot of what they did to me when I was involved in the training centers.
Oh my goodness. You went to do a year there, right?
Yes. And
that story was harrowing. Like, when I listened to it, I came home and was like, Nate, did you hear? Because he had listened to some of your podcasts. He was like, yes, I heard that episode where you were imprisoned.
That wasn't, that was probably one of the first episodes that I listened to of your podcast. And, I don't want to take people away. So I do want people to go and listen to your podcast.
What was that episode entitled? The one where you were in the training?
It's called Cult Brainwashing 101.
Yeah.
That was the one of what it was like to be living in the training center and going to, and like just what they did to you. I was just like stunned listening to that story of like.
Would you mind sharing that story with us? So maybe a little bit of background, the training center itself, what was all of that and so on?
ATI or IBLP owned land and buildings all over the United States and actually ended up owning them all over the world. They had buildings in Russia. They had buildings in Taiwan. In I think New Zealand, not Australia. I was going to say Australia and New Zealand, actually. Other places as well. But when I was all over the U.S., and one of their main training centers, and they called them training centers, was in Indianapolis, Indiana. And that was a hub for a lot of their apprenticeship programs. So a lot of different programs happened there. And I went several times for several different programs. The last time I was there was the last year I was in ATI. So I spent that whole year at that training center. And it was pretty much hell. It was. And
you were about 17, 18 years old?
I was 18.
18.
I had just turned 18 when I left. I turned 19 while I was there.
Okay.
And it was a very and so after my imprisonment,
literal imprisonment, you didn't know. You first of all, didn't understand what you had done wrong. Like what they gave you was just, you were sort of regurgitating. I just remember you talking about sobbing on a stage, trying to give an apology because you were forced to give one, but like not really understanding what you had done wrong because it was so vague. And there's all this spying on each other in this place. And then, and then you didn't know when they didn't tell you you're going to come out in X number of days. You were just thrown into solitary confinement under some other spiritual title name. What did they say they were sticking you in?
They called them the prayer room.
The prayer room is
called the prayer room.
The solitary confinement room, basically.
Yes, yeah. And
you're by yourself.
For 4 days.
The windows are opaque. You can't even see outside.
You couldn't see out. Yeah, there was some sort of fog put on the windows, so you couldn't see out. It was very disorienting, and when you read about how people do brainwashing, that's pretty much exactly what they did. It was intense, writing out exactly what they told you to say. You were supposed to feel very guilty, so I had to write confessions for my sins or the things that I had committed and done wrong. Although, again, I was very confused about what that was, so I just wrote what they told me to write. A lot of memorization of Bible verses, very random Bible verses, and then having to recite those in order to be considered done for the day.
So what prompted this? I realize that the story is a little disjointed.
Yes.
It's my fault. I keep interrupting.
No, it's fine.
What prompted them putting you into this prayer room? What was the last thing that you recall happening prior to being sent there?
The last straw for them was that I didn't complete my homework on time. I was behind on homework, and I had apparently flaunted their instruction not to leave my room unless I was actually going to a meal to eat or going upstairs to the school to do school. And I had sat in the hall a couple times outside my door, and their spies had caught me doing that. And I had gone to the store once when they had a store run because I needed some things from the store.
You guys didn't get to get out of there very long or very often to be able to go on runs to get personal, supplies for yourself or anything.
It was, a lot of people said it was once a month, but I don't think I went once a month. I might have gone 3 times the entire year I was there.
So this is a big opportunity for you to just get out.
And I considered, there wasn't anyone to ask permission because my instructor was gone and she was on home for a holiday. I think it was Thanksgiving. So I didn't know who to ask. And so I just went and I came back and I didn't see that as a special privilege or a special fun thing to do. It just seemed like
necessities.
Something Yeah, it seemed important and necessary. So when she got back, she conferred with her spies, and they had said that I had flaunted basically her rule to stay in my room and only do homework. I didn't feel like I had. I didn't feel like I had been rebellious. I didn't feel like I had done anything wrong. But if you want to find something, you find it. And so she felt like she found what she was looking for, which was that I had not followed the rules.
It sounds like the whole spying culture feels so like, I don't know. I know Nate was talking about Bob Jones and how they all were taught to spy on each other, and it was such a big part of the culture. And like, they get demerit points off, and then you get a certain amount.
We get demerits added,
and then you get kicked out and revoke privileges when you get to a certain point. And he was talking about losing demerits over.
Yeah, I got 75 demerits, I think was what it was. The scale, you get 150 per semester. Basically, yeah, we call them BJ bucks. Like, I got 150 BJ bucks I can spend on, I don't want to spend them on stupid things like, not shaving every day. Although I did I did get in trouble for that too. Not allowed. I got 75. And when you hit 75 in one semester, you are placed on social restriction.
You guys had lots of that at ATI?
No friends, huh? You weren't allowed to go see your friends?
Well, no, we were allowed to see friends of the same sex. We were not allowed to hang out with anybody of...
doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't count.
You're hanging out with another guy, dude, doesn't count. Yeah. But man, them girls, that's social.
That is very social.
Yep.
That's social right there.
And then when you hit 100 in a semester, you are on campus restriction, so you can't leave the campus for any reason.
Oh,
yeah.
But I'm sorry, I don't want to detract into Nate's stuff. We will probably do a bunch of episodes on Bob Jones because I'm learning about it. I'm like, this is wild stuff. But what I did find similar was the whole that culture of just people spying on each other, and like no one's your friend. Yeah. Everybody is almost. The more dirt you accumulate on others, the better for you, because then you can probably get out of stuff by telling on a bunch of people.
In every instance where I got in trouble, it was always another student who turned me in for it. It was never anybody who was like administrative staff.
You earned a different type of points for that.
For being a little tattletale made you a great Christian.
Right. And there were... This is the thing that people don't understand about ATI, because Bill's proclivities towards exploiting pretty girls. There's stories of him, because every group that came through, every group that did anything, that if you came for a conference or you came for a class or something, there would be a group photo, and everybody got to take home their group photo. And he would display these in places, and he would have overweight people stand on the edge so that he could cut them off.
Crop them out of the photo,
like,
of course.
Crop them out of the photo. Like, looks was important. And so if you couldn't stand out by being attractive enough, then you often would feel this compulsion to, tattle or stand out in some other way, or work really, really hard, and be indispensable. And so there were people who worked themselves to the bone. And I mean, obviously ATI encouraged that. Like, they were like, yes, you work now, that would be good. But also they would like sign up for extra, hoping to be liked But then the other side of this coin is that if you're attractive, then obviously there's issues with same sex,
then you're a temptation.
With the opposite sex, causing attraction and reaction to your looks. And so if boys reacted to me, I would be instantly monitored much more heavily by leadership, because they're watching for anything untoward to happen. I was not what you would consider to be like hot, but I was one of those girls that was cute. And so boys tended to they liked me. I will never forget being absolutely terrified because some guy, we were all bused to the same churches, and one of the guys came through that worked with the construction company that worked for ATI. So they had their own construction crew that built things at training centers. I don't know, remodeled stuff. He sat behind me, and I went to one of these churches that had a library in it. And I would go into the church library and I'd check out these little churchy romance novels. I would sit in church and read romance novels. I was so bad.
But they were approved by the church. They're like super Christian romance novels.
Right. It was this
Like
super evangelical
like
church.
The couples in the romance novels barely make eye contact. There's no physical
barely.
touching at all.
we're talking Janet Oak type of stuff. Like, it was really tame. So, but I'm sitting there reading, because I finally have some time alone to myself. So I'm kind of tuning out, and I don't have any parents to like take notes, in church like my parents had. And so it was kind of my alone time in church. So I'm towards the back and I'm sitting there reading, and all of a sudden I feel this person like right over my shoulder. And I kind of look, and there's this guy, and he's in my ear, and he goes, "Is your book good?" And I was like, oh, I think I'm in trouble now. I was like, oh, I recognize him from the training center. And I was like, yeah, like that. And I'm like, don't tell anyone, like that. And he's like, I got you. And I was like, this is heavy flirting in ATI. Like, you have no idea. This
could be in
heavy.
One of the ATI romance novels for like yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, like this was
a hot, heavy.
I'm like turning 10 shades of red. Like this was like way too much.
I don't know if I can handle this whole story, Jessica. I think I need to go cleanse myself.
It gets worse.
Oh no! What happened next?
The next day, he shows up to the training center to the cosmetology school, which I was in the training center, to get his hair cut by our teacher.
Oh.
And she's cutting his hair,
and he's looking your way.
So I'm at the table near, and he sees me in the mirror, and he looks in the mirror, and he goes, "Did you finish your book?" In that same seductive, like,
oh my God.
And my teacher goes, "What book? What are you talking about? What is he talking about?" And I'm like, "No, nothing. I don't know. I have no idea."
Oh no.
Like, ran out of there. And he like winked at me in the mirror. Like, I found him in the hall later, and I like shoved him in the chest, and I was like, "You nearly got me kicked out of this place." I was like, "What are you doing?"
Do you know how much we could get in trouble for this kind of stuff?
That's exactly what I said. I was like, "Do you know how much trouble you could get me into?" And he just laughed because he's leaving in a few minutes, and they needed their construction guys. But that's how bad you would be monitored for just talking about a book. You would.
That's incredible.
Wild stuff, man.
So,
I was also gotten huge trouble for riding the elevator alone with a boy once.
Oh.
We know what happens in elevators. I've watched a lot of romantic stories start off with an elevator.
Oh, yeah.
That's
one of those sexy elevator rides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I was single, I didn't get on any dating websites. I decided I was just going to ride elevators and see what happens.
There you go.
See what kind of trouble I can get into riding elevators with strangers.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
There you go. Write a book on
we
it.
had, there were a few elevators on campus that weren't like glass elevators. I think there was one or two glass elevators in some of the newer buildings at my school. Mm-hmm. And but the non-glass elevators, there was always somebody stationed by the elevator to make sure that like people weren't going in together.
Wow.
That's so bad. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Is I was riding the elevator at a time of day where it was pretty dead, and someone at the front desk watched me get on the elevator with a guy. And they watched the numbers, and the elevator was broken, so it didn't work very well, and it would stop too long on floors. And there were girl floors and guy floors, so it stopped on his floor. And he got off, and I waited and waited and waited and waited for the elevator doors to shut, and they wouldn't shut, and they wouldn't shut. Finally, they almost shut, and he comes running back around the corner, and he pushes them open again, and he says, "Can I come up to the school and get my hair cut today?" And I was like, "Of course you can. It's always open. Like, everyone knows this." And he's like, "Okay, all right, bye." And I'm like, "Bye, go away." No. And so he goes away, and now I wait and wait and wait and wait and wait and wait for the elevator doors to finally shut. They shut. By the time I got to the 13th floor where our school was, I get off, which is the top floor, and I get to my teacher's office, and I just happen to pass her office, and she's like, "Jessica, get in here." And I was like, "What did I do?" They had already called from the front desk and said she was on the elevator for X number of minutes on the 7th floor with him.
Wow.
I was like, nothing happened. I don't even like him. Like, what?
Jessica continues her story in our next episode, so if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. If you don't already have one, you can visit our website where you'll find a list of all of the apps we're available on. And while you're there, be sure to check out our previous episodes, leave us comments and messages, and so much more. Oh, and don't forget to follow us on social media. We're Full Mutuality on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Full Mutuality Podcast.